So think about it like this. If you break your arm, an X-ray gives you a very clean binary answer.
Right, yeah. You literally see the bone.
Exactly. You see that jagged white line on the black film, and the
Ah.
doctor just points to it, and you know exactly what happened. It is broken or it is not broken.
It is clean. And honestly, it is comforting, you
Yeah,
know?
it is.
Yeah.
We really like our problems to be visible. We want our histories to be categorized and neatly boxed up.
Oh, absolutely.
But the thing is, when you step into the world of ancient history, and especially ancient textual analysis, that X-ray machine just shatters entirely.
It completely falls apart.
Right. Because what if the clean binary stories we have been told, the ones we just accept, are actually hiding a massive, incredibly complex reality?
And that is the exact premise we are digging into today.
It is. I want you, the listener, to really hold on to that thought. Because today in this deep dive, we are taking that exact lens and applying it to, honestly, one of the most famous stories ever told.
The exit.
The Exodus. We are asking, what if the story of Moses was not some grassroots slave revolt at all?
Right. What if it was not this humble shepherd rising up?
Exactly. What if instead it was a highly classified, gritty, high-stakes royal power struggle within the world's most powerful ancient empire, within Egypt's 18th dynasty?
I mean, it completely shifts the paradigm of human history. You go from looking at a theological fable to looking at a highly classified geopolitical thriller.
Yes, a geopolitical thriller.
And the moment you stop treating the text as this, like, untouchable, magical artifact and start treating it as a redacted state document, an entirely different world emerges.
Okay, and I want to just say this up front.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and feeling a bit defensive, because maybe this challenges the Sunday school stories you grew up with.
Sure, which is a totally natural reaction.
Totally natural.
Yeah.
But stick with us, because the goal here is not to attack anyone's personal beliefs or to just erase the theology for the sake of it.
Not at all.
We are looking at a really fascinating stack of essays and analyses today.
Mm.
They detail what is known as the religion in the gray theory.
Which is such an incredible framework to view this through.
It really is. So the mission for today's deep dive is to strip away millennia of tradition and investigate this radically pragmatic proposal.
The proposal that the biblical Moses was actually a high-ranking Egyptian royal.
A royal who was completely erased from history and who used his elite military training and, well, ancient Sumerian mythologies to forge a brand new sovereign nation.
What is so fascinating here is that the core value of this entire deep dive is really learning how to differentiate between religious narratives and the pragmatic geopolitical realities that actually shape human history.
Right, because history is written by the victors, obviously.
Everyone says that, yeah. But we often forget it is also written by the survivors.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the survivors.
And sometimes, to survive a crumbling empire or a massive political shift, you have to completely rewrite your own origin story. You have to bury the brutal, ugly logistics under a thick layer of divine intervention.
Okay, let's unpack this, because my mind is already spinning, and I am so incredibly pumped to view ancient scripture, not just as like a moral guidebook, but as a coded geopolitical blueprint.
It is the best way to look at it.
But the religion in the gray theory demands that we do not actually start in Egypt, right?
No, we have to go way further back.
Right. To understand how an origin story gets rewritten for survival, we have to go all the way back to the very first origin story in the biblical text.
We have to look at Cain and Abel.
Exactly. And we are not looking at them as literal biological brothers having a fist fight in a field.
Far from it. The theory utilizes this trifocal analytical framework. And the very first lens of that framework requires us to look at the slaying of Abel by Cain as the ultimate metaphor.
A metaphor for what, exactly?
For a monumental clash between two entirely different civilizations happening during a period of just cataclysmic planetary upheaval.
Okay, so we are talking about the Younger Dryas here.
Yes, the Younger Dryas, the great Ice Age bottleneck.
Right, so for you listening, to set the stage around 12,000 years ago, the planet experiences this sudden, brutal return to freezing conditions.
It was incredibly rapid in geological terms.
Yeah, the climate just rapidly cools. The megafauna, the massive animals, they die off. And natural resources basically vanish almost overnight.
Humanity is pushed to the absolute brink of extinction during this period.
So that environmental chaos is our backdrop. And in this metaphorical framework the theory proposes, Abel represents what?
Abel represents the nomadic pastoral lifestyle. He is the classic hunter-gatherer.
Okay.
He lives in harmony with nature. He relies on the environment to just organically provide his flock with grass and water.
Which is great when the climate is stable. That is a beautiful, sustainable way to live if the Earth is cooperating.
Exactly. But when the climate turns hostile, when the ice returns and the grass literally dies, that wandering, passive lifestyle becomes a death sentence.
Right. You cannot just hope the environment will provide for you when the environment is, actively trying to kill you.
Precisely. And that brings us to Cain. In this metaphor, Cain represents the violent birth of human agency and structure.
He is the architect.
Yes, the settled agricultural architect.
Right.
In the actual text, Cain is described as the one who tills the soil.
He forces the earth to yield resources.
Right. He uses labor and engineering to extract what he needs to survive. So when Cain slays his brother Abel, the theory says we absolutely shouldn't view it as a literal fratricide.
It is not a murder story.
No. The murder of Abel is the systemic, absolutely necessary killing off of the obsolete nomadic way of life.
Wow. Okay, so Cain is basically the physical manifestation of humanity making this terrifying, totally pragmatic decision.
Yes. The decision that says we cannot just wander anymore.
Right, we have to build walls, we have to engineer agriculture, we have to dominate our environment, or you're all going to freeze and starve to death.
Exactly. And the text says that after this metaphorical murder, Cain goes east to the land of Nod, and he builds the first city, the city of Enoch.
But I have to push back here for a second, because building a city, even a rudimentary one, is not just pitching a bigger tent.
No, it is a massive leap in human development.
Right. How does humanity go from foraging for wild berries to suddenly understanding the complex mechanics of megalithic masonry and agricultural supply chains, and doing all of that in the middle of a global freeze?
It is the great mystery of archaeology, really.
The source material says Cain was, quote, uploaded with a survival kit. What does that actually mean? Are we talking about ancient aliens giving him blueprints or some sudden genetic mutation?
It is a great question, and no, we do not need extraterrestrials to explain it at all.
Thank goodness.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human history, the upload is a metaphor. It represents a profound, totally anomalous concentration of surviving generational knowledge.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
Sure. So imagine a pre-Dryas civilization that had just started to develop early architecture and early agriculture before the freeze.
Okay, they were making some progress.
Right. But when the cataclysm hits, almost all of that knowledge is wiped out. Most of the population dies.
Right, the bottleneck.
Yes. So Cain represents that bottleneck survivor. He is the specific lineage, or maybe a small group, that managed to retain or download that highly concentrated knowledge.
Ah, I see. He is basically pre-programmed with the essential data required to just bypass centuries of trial and error.
Precisely. He didn't wake up one morning with magical schematic for a city in his brain.
Right. He represents the hoarding of pre-cataclysm survival techniques, and he applies them aggressively to this new hostile world.
Exactly. And this fundamentally redefines the concept of sin and divine punishment in that Genesis text.
Oh, how so?
Well, in traditional theology, the mark of Cain is always viewed as a curse.
Yeah, it is the scarlet letter. He is the world's first murderer, so he gets branded.
Right. But if you read the actual text, God puts the mark on Cain to protect him.
Wait.
Yes. God warns that anyone who kills Cain will suffer sevenfold vengeance. The mark is a ward against harm.
I always struggled with that in Sunday school. I always wondered, why would a supposedly just creator protect a cold-blooded killer?
Because in this framework, God's mark of Cain was not a sinner's shield. It was a survivor's seal.
A survivor's seal. Wow.
The creator preserves the architect because humanity desperately needs the blueprint. If Cain dies, the knowledge to build that city of Enoch dies with him.
And humanity just goes extinct in the ice.
Exactly.
Which makes Cain's reaction to his exile make so much more sense. When God banishes him, Cain does not sound remorseful at all.
Not even a little bit.
He doesn't say, oh, I'm so sorry I killed my brother. He literally says, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Anyone who finds me will kill me.
Yes. He is complaining about the logistics of his deployment.
He's a pragmatist. He is worried about his supply lines and his personal security, not the moral weight of his actions.
His lack of traditional remorse is really the defining feature of this new era. If Cain represents a new epoch of human organization, his primary drive has to be self-preservation within a structured system.
Right. The sin was not a moral failure in the traditional sense.
No, it was the evolutionary friction of humanity moving from a natural, passive reliance on the earth to the structured and often violent toil of civilization.
It is staggering when you look at the sheer scale of this shift happening around this exact time in the archaeological record.
Oh, the evidence is undeniable.
Like, take Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It dates right around the end of the Younger Dryas.
The timing lines up perfectly.
And we are talking about 20-ton T-shaped stone pillars, perfect equilateral geometry, intricate carvings of predators. And we are told by mainstream archaeology that this was built by hunter-gatherers who hadn't even invented the wheel yet.
It stretches modern logic to its absolute breaking point, quite frankly.
It really does. It is like looking at the Panama Canal and being told, like, oh yeah, that was built by people who hadn't figured out how to use a shovel.
Exactly.
To build Göbekli Tepe, you need geotechnical engineering. You need hydraulic management just to the water supply.
You need massive logistical frameworks to feed the thousands of laborers required to move those stones.
Right. You cannot just have thousands of people spontaneously deciding to stack 20-ton rocks in perfect astronomical alignment.
No. You need a chief engineer. You need a central authority with a profound understanding of mechanics and social hierarchy.
You need a Cain.
You need a Cain. He is the uncompromising architect.
I like to think of Cain as like the ultimate aggressive tech founder disrupting an old industry.
That is a great analogy.
He ruthlessly kills off the outdated, inefficient nomadic model to build a centralized walled garden monopoly.
And he forces everyone to use his new operating system because it is literally the only one that will keep them alive.
Exactly. But, okay, if Cain was the architect who built the first civilization out of the chaos of the Younger Dryas, how does this metaphorical blueprint translate to the story of Moses?
Because Moses is also an architect.
Right, Moses is credited with building a nation out of nothing.
The parallels are deeply structural, and this is where the theory truly accelerates for me.
Let's get into it.
Just as Cain used his unique, concentrated knowledge to construct a physical city out of environmental chaos, Moses used his unique elite status to construct a sovereign nation out of the geopolitical chaos of the ancient Near East.
But to understand Moses as an architect on the level of Cain, we really have to strip away that Sunday school image completely.
We do. He wasn't a humble Hebrew slave who just, got lucky and found a burning bush.
Right, because a slave making mud bricks all day does not learn how to orchestrate the logistical movement of 1 million people across a hostile desert.
Not a chance. The theory posits that the real historical figure behind the name Moses was actually a high-ranking member of the Egyptian royal house.
A god king.
A literal god king. And to understand how a god king becomes a desert rebel, we have to talk about the brutal realities of the 18th dynasty.
And specifically, a concept known as damnatio memoriae.
Yes.
Which is the total state-sponsored erasure of a human being from history.
It is the ultimate political punishment.
So we are shifting timelines dramatically now. We are moving into the peak of the Egyptian 18th dynasty, roughly 1550 to 1292 BCE.
This is the era of absolute imperial dominance for Egypt.
And the religion in the gray theory argues that the name Moses isn't even the guy's real name. It is a placeholder.
That is a linguistic fact that so often gets overlooked in biblical studies. In ancient Egyptian, the suffix mos, or formosissus, simply means born of.
Okay, so like a secondary part of a name.
Right. We see it in names like Thutmose, which means born of the god Thoth, or Ramesses, which means born of Ra.
So they always have the deity attached to the front.
Exactly. But with Moses, the prefix, the actual identity of the specific god he was affiliated with, has been intentionally stripped away. The man we call Moses is literally just born of blank.
He is born of nobody. He has been completely redacted.
He was subjected to damnatio memoriae. And you have to understand, this wasn't just losing a popularity contest.
It was a physical act.
Yes. The state would dispatch teams of artisans with chisels to physically scrape his name and his image off of obelisks, temple walls, official bureaucratic records.
They just deleted him.
They destroyed his statues, or they recarved the faces to look like someone else. It is a total structural deletion of existence from the historical narrative.
But why? I mean, why was this erasure so incredibly necessary for the internal stability of Egypt?
To answer that, we have to look at the biblical story we all know.
Okay, so the story is Moses flees Egypt because he kills an Egyptian taskmaster who is beating a Hebrew slave. He buries the body in the sand, realizes people know about it, and runs for his life.
Right. Now, why does that story not make any sense in the context of the 18th dynasty?
Because it completely ignores the geopolitical reality and the social hierarchy of that specific era.
Exactly. The 18th dynasty royals were not just wealthy politicians or rich guys in a palace. They were considered literal living gods on earth.
Right.
The concept of Maru, which is divine order and balance in the universe, was entirely dependent on the infallibility of the pharaoh and his immediate bloodline.
So, a prince of Egypt killing an Egyptian guard.
Would be entirely inconsequential.
Really, just nothing.
A living god does not answer to a peasant, a guard, or even a regional governor. If a royal prince disciplined or even murdered a lower-class laborer, he would never, ever be forced to flee the empire for his life.
You wouldn't even warrant a trial, would it?
Not at all. It wouldn't even make a ripple. So the biblical narrative of him fleeing over a taskmaster's death is clearly a sanitized cover story.
So let me get this straight. You're telling me the iconic story of Moses defending a slave is actually masking a lethal internal coup?
If we follow the logic of damnatio memoria, yes. The only crime severe enough to warrant a royal fleeing the empire, followed by the state actively deleting his existence, would be a crime against divinity itself.
Meaning the murder of a fellow royal family member.
Precisely. The 18th dynasty relied on the illusion of divine stability.
That makes sense.
The entire power structure, the compliance of millions of subjects, rested on the belief that the ruling family was unified and untouchable.
Right, they're gods. Gods don't squabble like peasants.
Exactly. So if a god bleeds at the hands of another god, if a prince assassinates an heir in the palace, the state is thrown into an existential crisis. You cannot hold a public trial for a royal assassin.
Because the moment the public realizes the gods are butchering each other in the palace bedrooms, the illusion just shatters.
The curtain falls.
The population realizes their rulers are just ruthless, flawed humans. And the whole system of compliant taxation and slave labor collapses.
So the only way to preserve the myth is to pretend the event never happened at all.
The cover-up.
Right. The victim's death must be covered up or reassigned. Maybe they say he died of a fever, and the perpetrator must be erased entirely from the timeline.
Which means the Exodus wasn't sparked by a sudden moral awakening about the evils of slavery.
No.
It was a geopolitical schism stemming from a massive royal cover-up. It is the fallout of a palace assassination.
It changes everything about how you read the text.
It really does. But that leaves us with a glaring, massive question. If you, the listener, are tracking with us here, if Moses was an erased royal, which royal was he?
This is where the historical detective work becomes absolutely fascinating.
I love this part.
The religion and the gray sources present 4 distinct identities proposed for Moses within the 18th dynasty.
Okay.
There are specific anomalies and missing pieces in the Egyptian record that perfectly fit the profile of a disgraced, erased prince.
Let's dive deep into these 4 faces of a disgraced royal. Proposal 1 is Prince Thutmose.
Prince Thutmose is an incredibly compelling candidate. He was the eldest son and the legitimate heir of Pharaoh Amenhotep III.
So he was next in line for the throne?
He was. We know he existed because he served as a high priest of Pa in Memphis. We even have a beautiful schist sarcophagus he had made for his pet cat.
Which is such a weird, specific detail to survive history.
Right, but it proves he was real and active. He was poised to rule the most powerful empire on the planet. And then, abruptly, he vanishes from the historical record.
He just disappears.
He never takes the throne. Instead, his younger brother, who becomes the heretic king Akhenaten, takes over.
So Proposal 1 suggests that Prince Thutmose is Moses.
Yes.
The heir to the throne commits a crime against divinity. Perhaps he murders a rival sibling or an uncle to secure his power.
Right.
But because he is a living god, he cannot be publicly executed. Instead, he is subjected to damnatio memoriae, forced into exile in the desert, and eventually returns to plague his own family.
That is the first scenario. He is erased for his own crime.
Okay.
Now, Proposal 2 looks at a slightly different branch of the family tree, but with very similar mechanics. Proposal 2 is Prince Amenhotep.
And just to clarify, we are not talking of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, but a prince with the same name.
Correct. This Prince Amenhotep was the eldest son of Thutmose IV.
Okay, so this would make him the uncle to Akhenaten.
Exactly. Similar to Prince Thutmose, this Prince Amenhotep is clearly documented early in his life and then suddenly disappears from all monuments and records.
Another vanishing act.
Right. The theory argues his disappearance wasn't a quiet death from disease, but the result of a lethal family slaying. A high-stakes internal coup that failed, forcing him to flee as a high-profile political refugee to Midian,
So both of those proposals frame Moses as a named legitimate heir who commits a crime and basically gets burned.
Yes.
But Proposal 3 takes a completely different and honestly a much darker angle. The unknown usurper.
I think this is one of the most intriguing possibilities. In Proposal 3, we revisit the disappearance of Prince Thutmose, the heir of Amenhotep III we just talked about.
Right.
But in this scenario, Moses isn't Thutmose. Moses is an unnamed royal rival who murdered the Crown Prince Thutmose.
Okay, I need to wrap my head around this. If this usurper wanted raw power and he successfully killed the heir apparent, why wouldn't he just take the throne? Why run out to the desert?
Because he was caught before he could consolidate power.
Ah, I see.
Imagine the chaos. The legitimate heir is found dead. The usurper is discovered, perhaps by the royal guard or Pharaoh Amenhotep III himself. The usurper has to flee immediately before he is quietly executed.
He makes a run for it.
But think about the geopolitical nightmare this causes for the pharaoh who remains on the throne.
It is the ultimate embarrassment. Your divine heir was assassinated by a cousin or a bastard brother. You look incredibly weak.
Exactly. The sources point out that if Prince Thutmose had died honorably in battle or even from an illness, he would have been celebrated. We would have massive statues of him.
But he vanished.
Because the state had to execute a double erasure.
Double erasure.
Yes. They had to erase the victim, Prince Thutmose, to hide the deep embarrassment of a divine heir being murdered. And they had to erase the perpetrator, this unknown usurper who becomes Moses, to hide the crime itself.
Wow, it is like looking at a heavily redacted CIA document.
That is exactly what it is like.
We know a massive explosion happened. A huge chunk of succession history is just blacked out with a Sharpie. But we have these different theories on who actually lit the match.
It completely reframes the era. We are not looking at a peasant uprising. We are looking at Game of Thrones level succession wars.
That is so intense. But let's look at Proposal 4, because this one feels very different from the others. The defector ambassador.
Yes.
Contrast this with the unknown usurper for me. They seem to have very different motives.
They represent two very different mechanisms of rebellion.
Okay.
The unknown usurper is driven by raw, immediate power. It is an assassination, immediate discovery, and a panicked flight into the desert.
Right, it's very fast.
Proposal 4, the defector ambassador, provides a much more nuanced, gradual political narrative. And frankly, it perfectly explains the military mechanics of how the exodus actually occurred.
Let's break down this ambassador proposal. According to this theory, Moses wasn't a sudden murderer on the run. He was an Egyptian prince, specifically appointed by the pharaoh to serve as the official diplomat to the Israelites in the Goshen region.
Right. He is a high-ranking official, educated in the absolute best military and administrative academies of Egypt, and he is embedded with this subject population.
He is supposed to be the enforcer of Egyptian will.
Exactly. But over time, as he serves in this capacity, he experiences a profound ideological shift. He grows increasingly resentful of Egypt's brutal overlord style of control.
Okay, I have to ask the ELI 5 question here.
Right.
Explain, like I'm 5.
Sure.
If Moses is this elite 18th dynasty Egyptian royal walking around in fine linen and gold, why on earth would the oppressed Israelite laborers trust him?
It is a valid question.
I mean, he is literally the face of their oppressor.
Yeah.
How does he cross that massive cultural and linguistic divide to become their leader?
Well, it doesn't happen overnight. That is the beauty of the ambassador proposal. As an embedded diplomat, he speaks their language. He interacts with their tribal elders daily. Over years, his personal resentment of the central Egyptian authority aligns with the Israelites' desire for freedom.
So they find common ground.
Yes. And he leverages his royal resources. Perhaps he starts smuggling weapons, diverting rations, and providing tactical training to these tribes.
So it begins as a marriage of convenience.
Exactly. The slaves need a military genius with insider knowledge of the Egyptian war machine, and Moses needs an army to execute his rebellion against the pharaoh.
He essentially goes native. But wait, Egypt wasn't stupid. They had a massive intelligence network.
Oh, incredibly sophisticated.
They had military garrisons stationed everywhere. If an Egyptian prince is actively arming and organizing a subject population against the state, the empire is going to notice.
They absolutely notice.
So how did he get away with this treason long enough to actually build a functional rebel army?
Yeah.
Why didn't Pharaoh Amenhotep III just send a chariot division and crush him immediately?
That is where the element of blood ties becomes absolutely critical. The geopolitical reality of the royal family played a massive role here.
How so?
According to the sources, Pharaoh Amenhotep III was fully aware of the prince's growing deceit and betrayal.
He knew.
He received the intelligence reports. He knew his ambassador was going rogue. But the pharaoh delayed his reaction.
Why?
He chose to initially ignore the treason solely because of their close familial blood connection.
See, here is where it gets really interesting to me. We always picture Pharaoh as this one-dimensional, mustache-twirling villain from a movie.
Right, just barking orders.
Yeah, the booming voice of absolute tyranny. But this theory paints Amenhotep III as a deeply conflicted family man.
He is.
He is sitting on the throne, watching his nephew or his brother commit high treason, and he hesitates.
Because it is his family.
Right. He lets his rogue relative get away with it, perhaps hoping it is just a phase, or he simply is unable to bring himself to order the execution of his own blood.
And that psychological hesitation, that temporary shield of protection provided by blood ties, gave Moses the crucial window of time he needed.
Wow.
You cannot overstate how difficult it is to transition from a diplomat to a rebel general. Moses used that borrowed time and his elite Egyptian royal education to manage massive military logistics.
Let's talk about those logistics for a minute, because this is the glaring hole in the traditional Sunday school narrative.
It really is.
You, the listener, just try to imagine organizing 1 million people. Hell, try organizing 50 people for a family reunion at a park.
It is a nightmare.
Right. Now imagine organizing hundreds of thousands of people, establishing a chain of command, marching them into a hostile desert with no natural food sources, and keeping them alive for decades.
It is an impossible feat for an amateur.
Exactly. A regular slave simply does not have the administrative capacity or the strategic foresight to do that.
It requires state-level strategic planning. The royal status uniquely enabled Moses to build a nation.
What specific training would he have had?
He understood supply chains. He understood sanitation for large encampments, which is absolutely critical. If you do not have proper sanitation, disease will wipe out your army in a week.
Oh, for sure. Dysentery would just decimate them.
Right. He understood defensive formations, legal delegation, the administration of justice. He essentially took the highly efficient Egyptian military structure and superimposed it onto these disorganized Israelite tribes.
He completely reshaped their military and cultural identity.
He did.
He forged them into a sovereign political force capable of surviving the wilderness. But eventually, the pharaoh's patience runs out, doesn't it?
It always does. The breaking point is finally reached. The significance of the blood ties is outweighed by the existential threat to the empire's economy and security.
The conflicted family man finally snaps.
Yes. He snaps and demands immediate retribution.
And it is at this exact moment that Moses officially transitions from a tolerated rogue diplomat into a high-profile political refugee.
Yes.
The Egyptian military machine is turned against him, forcing the exodus to begin.
Exactly. He executes the geopolitical schism. But as any historian will tell you, a military general can only organize an army.
Right.
He can hand out swords and ration out grain. But to build a nation, to keep those people united when they are starving in a desert, surrounded by enemies, and wondering why they ever left the relative safety of Egypt, you need something much more powerful than just a supply chain.
You need a unifying belief system. You need ideology.
Yes. And this brings us to one of the most profound aspects of the religion in the Gray Theory.
Section 5 of the source material.
Right. It explores how Moses managed to get these newly liberated subjects to completely abandon the Egyptian pantheon.
Which is huge. How do you get 1 million people to stop worshiping the gods they have known for generations and follow a singular, unseen deity?
Well, the theory makes a bold claim here. Moses did not just discover monotheism burning in a bush.
He didn't just invent it out of thin air.
No. Instead, he utilized his elite education to refine ancient post-flood ancestral fragments into a new sovereign belief system.
Okay, to understand this, we have to look beyond Egypt to the older civilizations of Mesopotamia.
The Sumerians and the Babylonians.
Right. The sources identify specific elements within the biblical Genesis narrative that are clear remnants of a pre-existing global tradition.
For example, the Hebrew word tehom,
used in Genesis to describe the deep, or the primordial waters of creation.
Exactly. That word shares a direct linguistic and thematic root with timamat, who is the Babylonian goddess of the chaos ocean in the Enuma Elish.
It is an ancestral memory. It is a collective mythology that was shared across the ancient Near East, largely stemming from the aftermath of that cataclysmic global flooding we discussed with Cain.
Exactly. Think about the epic Sumerian texts that predate the biblical Genesis by over 1,000 years.
Like the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes, it features Utnapishtim, a man who survives a global flood sent by the gods by building a massive boat.
Which sounds very familiar.
And the Sumerian story of Zusudra is almost identical to the story of Noah.
So these narratives were already out there.
They were. These texts contain the stories of a great deluge, the creation of mankind from clay, and a divine council of gods, the Anunnaki, who constantly bicker, fight, and interact with humanity.
Okay, so Moses, being a highly educated Egyptian royal, would have had access to the greatest libraries and archives in the ancient world.
He would have been highly literate.
Right. He was fluent in the geopolitics and the literature of the surrounding empires. He would have intimately known these Sumerian and Mesopotamian epics.
Absolutely.
But there's a problem, right? The Sumerian stories are messy.
Very messy.
They are polytheistic. They are filled with dozens of squabbling gods who flood the earth just because humans are making too much noise and disrupting their sleep.
Which is a terrible foundation for a strict, disciplined, unified nation.
Yeah, you can't forge a fierce, unified army if they believe the heavens are in a constant state of civil war.
So Moses acts as an ideological architect.
I love this concept.
The theory suggests he took these familiar, shared cultural fragments, these ancient Sumerian myths that the Israelites likely already had some cultural memory of, and he strategically refined them.
He strips away the polytheistic divine council of the Anunnaki gods.
Yes.
He collapses the many into the one.
He initiates a calculated cultural renaissance. Look at the biblical text of Genesis when it says, "Let us make man in our image."
Yeah, the plural us.
That plural us is actually a linguistic fossil. It is a leftover remnant from the older Sumerian assembly of gods.
Oh, wow.
Right. But Moses condenses the narrative focus. He takes the wild, unpredictable mythological world of demigods and chaos monsters, and he replaces it with a highly structured, legalistic, covenant-based relationship between one singular ultimate god and one chosen people.
So, to use an analogy,
Right.
you were saying Moses essentially took the open source code of ancient Sumerian myths.
Right.
He updated the software to remove all the extra gods and the messy divine bureaucracy, and he installed it as the new streamlined monotheistic operating system for the Israelite nation.
That is the perfect way to look at it. He patched the bugs of polytheism.
That is brilliant.
And by doing this, he uses religion as an ideological weapon. He gives the Israelites a history and a cosmic importance that completely bypasses Egypt.
Because if they kept worshiping the Egyptian gods, if they kept praying to Ra or Horus,
They would always be mentally tethered to the pharaoh.
right, they would always view themselves as lesser subjects of the Egyptian divine order. To sever their physical ties to Egypt, he had to sever their mental chains.
And this perfectly defines how the religion in the gray theory differentiates between religious and geopolitical motivations.
The monotheism wasn't just a spiritual revelation.
No, it was a pragmatic, highly calculated geopolitical tool required to establish national sovereignty. The theology served the statecraft.
It is breathtaking when you really step back and look at it. The religion is the mortar holding the bricks of the new nation together.
Keeping them from scattering back to the comforts of Egyptian slavery when the desert gets too harsh.
Exactly. But this geopolitical pragmatism, this brutal, calculated reality of nation building, it doesn't end with the creation of the religion. It follows Moses all the way to the very end of his life. Which brings us to the climax of our deep dive, the geopolitics of the Canaan border.
This is where the theory provides one of its most compelling reinterpretations of the biblical text.
Let's lay it out. We all know the traditional, heartbreaking ending to the Moses story.
Right.
He leads the people for 40 years through the grueling wilderness. They finally, miraculously, reach the border of the promised land, Canaan. They could literally see it.
And then
Yeah.
God tells Moses he cannot enter.
Right. And the biblical reason given for this ban has always been incredibly puzzling.
It has always felt off.
He is barred from entering because of a supposedly religious sin. Specifically, earlier in the journey, he struck a rock with his staff to bring forth water, instead of speaking to the rock as God commanded.
Yeah.
And for that single moment of frustrated disobedience, he is exiled from the culmination of his life's work.
From a purely theological standpoint, it has always felt like a disproportionately harsh punishment for a man who endured decades of rebellion, warfare, and starvation to fulfill a divine mandate.
It just doesn't sit right.
But the religion in the gray theory completely discards that theological explanation.
It looks right past the rock and the staff.
Exactly. It reinterprets this final ban as a harsh, unavoidable geopolitical necessity.
And it all loops perfectly back to Moses' true identity.
It does.
If we accept the premise that Moses was not a grassroots Hebrew slave, but a highly recognizable former member of the Egyptian 18th dynasty elite,
Whether he was Prince Thutmose, Prince Amenhotep, the defector ambassador, or the usurper.
regardless of which face he wore, his very face is a massive political liability.
To understand why, we have to look at the geopolitical map of the ancient world during this specific era.
Right, because Canaan was not just an empty space.
No, Canaan was not a free, empty, unclaimed land waiting for the Israelites to just walk in and set up camp. During the 18th dynasty, Canaan was an Egyptian territory.
It was heavily colonized. It was an Egyptian vassal state characterized by heavy imperial influence, strict taxation sent back to Thebes, and, crucially, stationed Egyptian military garrisons.
Exactly. So put yourself in the sandals of the local Canaanite population or the Egyptian soldiers stationed at those border garrisons.
Okay.
If Moses, an infamous, high-ranking, highly recognizable Egyptian royal who vanished from the capital decades ago, suddenly marches a massive armed host across the border into an Egyptian colony, what does that actually look like?
It absolutely does not look like a slave liberation.
No.
It looks like a continuation of imperial rule. Or, even worse, it looks like a military coup.
Exactly. It looks like a rogue prince who was exiled from the capital is now returning with a massive mercenary army to carve out his own territory.
To steal a vassal state and challenge the pharaoh's dominance from the perimeter of the empire.
And if that happens, the Egyptian Central Authority cannot ignore it.
They would have to respond.
They would deploy the full might of the imperial army to crush the rebellion and execute the rogue prince.
And the Israelites would just be collateral damage.
Furthermore, the Israelites themselves would never be viewed by the surrounding nations, or by themselves, as a truly independent people.
They would just be the private army of an Egyptian warlord. So what does this all actually mean? It means the tragic irony of Moses' life is that he spent his entire existence building this nation.
He poured everything into them.
He forged them in the crucible of the desert. He gave them a codified law, an advanced military structure, and a unified monotheistic God.
Right.
But to give them the one thing they actually needed to survive, true, undeniable independence, he couldn't be there.
His royal Egyptian identity would have inherently compromised the new nation's claim to sovereignty.
He was a liability to his own creation.
For the Israelites to be recognized as a distinct, autonomous political entity, they needed a clean break from the 18th dynasty.
And that meant their Egyptian-born architect had to be permanently excluded from the final destination. She had to step aside. He had to die in the wilderness so that the nation of Israel could be born in Canaan without the shadow of the Egyptian throne looming over them.
Yes.
The story of striking the rock wasn't a divine punishment. It was a brilliant theological cover story for the ultimate geopolitical sacrifice.
This raises an important question for anyone studying history, theology, or political science.
And for you, listening right now.
If we accept this theory, we have to fundamentally change how we read these ancient texts.
We really do.
We are no longer looking at a magical fable of staffs turning into snakes and seas parting on command. We are witnessing a masterclass in ancient statecraft.
We're looking at the brutal realities of nation building, military defection, ideological warfare, and profound personal sacrifice. It strips away the magic, but honestly, it makes the story so much more human and so much more impressive.
It really grounds it in reality.
Let's briefly recap the incredible journey we have been on today for you, the listener, because we have covered a massive expanse of time, geography, and historical theory.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We started by looking through that trifocal lens at the absolute dawn of civilization. We reimagined Cain, not as a cursed, aimless wanderer, but as a pre-programmed architect.
The chief engineer who utilized an uploaded survival blueprint of concentrated pre-cataclysm knowledge.
Right, to build the first megalithic city of Enoch, saving a fraction of humanity from the devastating ice age of the Younger Dryas.
We then jumped forward thousands of years to the peak of the Egyptian 18th dynasty, pulling back the curtain on the illusion of divine stability.
We uncovered the bloody, paranoid secrets of the royal house and the brutal practice of damnatio memoriae.
We realized that the Moses story is incredibly likely a redacted, politically sanitized record of a lethal internal coup or a high-profile defection.
We examined the four specific faces of that disgraced royal. from the vanished heir Prince Thutmose to the violent unknown usurper.
We watched as an Egyptian ambassador defected, using the psychological shield of blood ties with a conflicted pharaoh to buy the critical time needed to build a rebel army right under the empire's nose.
We saw how that elite royal military training allowed him to manage the impossible logistics of moving a massive population through a hostile environment.
And we saw how he brilliantly weaponized ideology.
Taking the open source Sumerian myths of a post-flood world, the epics of Gilgamesh and Ziusudra, and refining them into a sharp, unified, monotheistic religion to permanently sever his people's mental chains to Egypt.
And finally, we arrived at the dusty border of Canaan.
Recognizing that Moses' final exile wasn't a punishment from a petty deity over a struck rock.
It was a cold, calculated, heartbreaking geopolitical sacrifice necessary to guarantee the true sovereignty of the nation he had built.
It is a staggering reinterpretation of the text, and I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over today. Something to explore on your own that builds on exactly what we've been talking about.
It is the natural next question.
Right. If the foundational text of Western civilization, the Exodus, the birth of the law, the formation of monotheism, is actually a redacted, heavily sanitized record of an ancient royal coup and brilliant military statecraft, what else are we misreading?
Exactly.
What other miracles recorded throughout human history, whether it's the sudden catastrophic collapse of Jericho's walls or the miraculous survival of vastly outnumbered armies in antiquity, are actually just brilliant hidden military logistics, advanced ancient engineering, and geopolitical strategy waiting to be decoded?
When you realize the X-ray machine is broken, you have to start looking at the shadows, because the shadows, the redactions, the erased names on the temple walls, that is almost always where the real history is hiding.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the religion and the gray theory. We hope it broke your historical X-ray machine just a little bit today. Keep questioning the stories you have been told. Keep looking for the gritty geopolitical realities beneath the theological surface, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.